Welcome to the Amador Fire Can Report, your go-to source for the latest updates, insights, and stories from Amador Fire. Serving over 500 square miles from the vineyards in the valley to the snow-capped Sierras, our combination department staffs 9 stations and puts 7 engines on the road every single day. Backed by a team of dedicated professionals and more than 30 committed volunteers, we're here to protect, serve, and engage with our community. From fire safety tips to behind-the-scenes action, we're here to keep you informed. I'm your host, Kayla Dale, Public Information Officer for Amador Fire. In today's episode, we're switching sides of the table and I'm the one being interviewed. Chief Withrow is stepping in to ask some questions about my journey into this role, what it means to serve as a PIO for Amador Fire, and how public information plays a vital role in emergency response and community connection. So let's dive in.
All right. Well, Kayla, let me start by saying thank you for letting us turn the tables on you. And instead of you interviewing somebody, you're going to be the one getting interviewed today. I thought there'd be a lot of value in sharing with our community and our members just exactly what you do and help them get to know you a little better. So I thought we'd start with a basic introduction. How did you get here? How did you even end up with Amador Fire, if you don't mind?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to do this interview where we're kind of switching the tables around and having myself interviewed. So to answer your question, I was born and raised in Northern California in Paradise Chico area. I got into the fire service when I was 21 years old with the state agency as a personnel specialist. And I always really admired on large incidents when I could help in the PIO role. As you know, in the state agency, when there is incidents, you can kind of fill roles as needed. And I always got to help in the PIO shop, answering phones and helping get people the information that they needed. And that was always an aspiration of mine to do so. My husband and I moved to Amador County about 7 years ago for his job. Never been to Amador County before. I remember having to Google just to get to the grocery store. But, we really quickly grew to love this county, and it actually truly feels like home now. And now we have a 2-year-old daughter that I'm really excited to raise up in Amador County. I started with Amador Fire 6 years ago this month, which has flown by. And, I think there's power being in the role that I'm in and starting with answering phones and just kind of as an administrative assistant, because I've really grown to learn all the areas of this department to better suit me and my skills as a public information officer. And now 6 years later, I get to live out my dream of what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and I think your previous experience with the state, working in a call center and having a good perspective on the types of questions and concerns that a lot of community members have before and during an incident is invaluable as well. So I just want to touch on one of the things you've heard me say when we bring new people into the fire service. I always explain that the fire service is much more than just a position or a role. It really becomes who you are. And I was reflecting on you being married, and now you have a little one in the house, and your job as public information officer is really no different than a firefighter in the sense that you never know when the tones are going to go off and your services are going to be needed. What have you done to sort of balance that in your life and make that work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, I would say balancing this role with family life has definitely been a learning experience. Being a public information officer means that I need to be ready to respond at any moment, whether it's day or night, weekday or weekend. And what has really helped the most for me is clear communication at home. And setting those realistic boundaries where I can. My husband and I are a very strong team. We plan ahead, we have to stay flexible, and we lean on routines that help our little one feel secure even when things change unexpectedly. If I'm leaving in the middle of the night or we're sitting down for dinner and then I suddenly have to leave. I've also learned to just be fully present when I am home. I'm all in and I do my best to be present with my family when I can. It's not always perfect, but it's deeply worth it. And at the end of the day, both roles, PIO and mom, are about service. And the only way that I can do my best or offer my best service is to have clear communication and be present.
Yeah, I tell you, I rely on that heavily because there are times I'm distracted doing other things. And even though you and I aren't together or in the same building, you'll shoot me a text, "Hey, Chief, are you aware of this occurring?" And many times I'm not. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate that. And I can't thank you enough for your diligence with respect to that. I'll call it situational awareness.
Yeah.
You're really good at it.
Thank you. And I think that that goes both ways, right? That we have a number of people that are maybe it's their off day and everyone's paying attention and just keeping informed. So,
Yeah, yeah, it's a big part of our job. You
absolutely.
know, when you talked about balancing your family, I know you were with me. We went to the Fire District Association of the California conference a couple months back I believe it was in the city of Napa or just outside of Napa. And I was listening to a local fire chief of Sac Metro Fire, Chief House, and we were talking about, I think, recruitment and retention or something along those lines. But I think he had a very telling statement or a very powerful statement when he said, you know, you are a firefighter all the time, and you're going to be, if you're doing a good job, you're going to be 100% into your job. And that's going to take a toll on your family. But the part that really stood out to me that I hope you practice, and I believe you do, is when you're on the job, when you're in work mode, you're in work mode.
Mm.
And when you're spending time with your family, you're doing family events, etc., you're 100% with your family. And I think that's a key for people like yourself and myself to really have a balanced life. So, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
No, I think that's absolutely part of it. And something you just made me think of is there's so much pre-planning when you're in this line of work. And I think I can speak for anybody in the fire service is you have to have those conversations at home about what's going to happen if there is an incident or so and so staying home late from work. And for my case, you know, my husband's in the fire service now also. And so we just had a parent teacher conference, for example, this week with my little one at her school. And we had to have the conversation of there's other people, grandmas, grandparents on the list to pick her up if there's an incident, because, you know, our job calls on us to be there. And so I think a lot of that pre planning and healthy balance, like I continue to say, is having those conversations and having a plan in place. Know your house is organized. For example, if you had to leave for a wildfire, have those conversations with your family and the people that support you. And I think a big part of being in the fire service and absolutely something that I love is the family environment that surrounds it, whether they're blood or not. You know I can rely on a handful of people in this department to be there if I needed them, and that's something that I've loved from day one as a 21-year-old getting into the fire service.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like you. I share that. I find a lot of value in that, and it's humbling to think about the people that come out of the woodwork when someone needs help. You know, in this circle. So before I get into how your position has evolved, I wanted to speak a little bit. You know, I think it's important to understand that as a public information officer, and that really just scratches the surface on what you do here for us. You do so many other things. You wear so many other hats. I feel like PIO represents the bulk of what you do, but you certainly fulfill other needs as well, whether it's paying invoices or organizing volunteer trainings or what have you. You're somebody I would definitely call as a utility player, and there's just extreme value in that. So I appreciate that about you. But as your position has evolved, when you got here, did you imagine this? Did you ever imagine you'd be a public information officer at Amador Fire, or did that just seem out of reach? I don't think we formalized your title until I became fire chief, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And, you know, I think that's a hard question because Amador Fire never had a public information officer or really anybody in that role at all. And prior to you with Chief White, I kind of just started doing this work on my own. I obviously sought approval from the fire chief at that
Sure.
time, but I kind of took it upon myself to reach out to these communities. And looking back now, I think I would have done things a little bit differently, but it worked. It really started with just doing simple community barbecues where we would educate the community members and homeowners. And those events really opened my eyes to how powerful it is to connect with people face to face. And that's something that you talk about all the time is just connecting with our community. And that's where the passion sparked for me, I think, educating and empowering the public, I would say. I never really saw myself as an educator, really. But when it comes to fire and emergency services, I've really realized that that public information key piece is a form of service. And, you know, helping people understand what's happening, what to expect, and how to prepare is what matters. And that's the part that I really love. Just how can we create comfort for people to live not in fear? during specific times of the year, like fire season. And, specifically for me being a PIO with Amador Fire, it was really under your leadership that we solidified this position or this role. And you really saw and recognized the value in it. And you really gave it structure and direction. And it just all came together very naturally.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that very much. And I do think it's an extremely valuable role for us, for any organization. Um, One of the things that I think is a reality that fire chiefs and other leaders in the community have to understand is there's a hunger, an extreme hunger for information out there. And we can probably thank social media and other outlets for that. But people want info and they want it right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we would be remiss. I think we're not a very big organization. We're only 9 stations and so on and so forth, but we're just big enough that um, we create enough of an appetite that it's incumbent on us to make sure we're providing that good, accurate info in a timely manner. And as you know, that's a big part of your role here. Another part of your role is relationships. I just want to touch on that. I really admire that about you. And I'm going to share a quick story. I was attending a community meeting in one of the communities we serve. And I forget, I think you were on vacation with your family or something, but probably was the first meeting you'd ever missed in that community over the years. Anyways, I thought I'd be funny, and I joked with the coordinator, and I told her, I said, "Oh, Kayla's no longer with us." And I was just floored at her response. I thought she was going to let me have it. She was not happy. And I quickly had to tell her, "Hey, I'm just kidding. Kayla's off this week with her family, getting some much needed rest." And she gave me the okay. But I just think that's a testament, Kayla, to all the hard work you've done. It's one thing to share information, but it's also equally important that you have relationships that are established long before that information becomes critical.
Mm-hmm.
And not just relationships and information, but that you have credibility.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe you've worked really hard on your own to do that. And I admire you for that. And I think that's just a testament to your commitment and your diligence here. So talk to me about that. How do you feel about those relationships and building them, etc.?
Yeah, thank you for that. That really means a lot. And I try really hard to build those relationships. And I think that somebody in the PIO role, it absolutely is not a clock in, clock out kind of role. You're always on, but that's what I signed up for. And I know that going into that. And like I said earlier, those are the conversations that I've had with my family. So everybody knows what's expected of me. It's very important to have an understanding of the community that you serve. For an example, we work really closely with a lot of Firewise communities and those leads. And we're educating those leads consistently to share information back in their communities. We're using them to help us spread our message, spread preparedness messages, and everything that comes with that. But over the years, we've built relationships. I've sat in the living rooms of these people's homes. I've sat in their cul-de-sacs presenting. And now people have seen me present. They've seen me present pregnant. Now they've seen me present with a little baby coming.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that that's something that's great about Amador County and Amador Fire specifically is that we are large enough that we are busy and we have a lot going on, but we're not overly large that we can't have those personal connections with community members. I always talk about humanizing us as the fire service. People think, oh, those are firefighters. They're a totally different level. But at the end of the day, we have families that we go home to, just like anybody else in any different role. And so maintaining that and keeping that humanizing figure for us, I think is important. For example, one of our Firewise leads was just talking to me and she's going to miss a meeting because her husband's having chemo treatment, sadly. Mm-hmm. And so I messaged her on Saturday and asked how the treatments are going and checked in on her because I want Amador Fire to be that department that they know that they can count on, not just for a presentation or not just to answer the 911 call, but to be there and know what's going on in their world. And that's what I really love about this role is that I can offer that to the public.
Yeah, I think you do amazing at it. I was prior to working here, I interact obviously with this agency a fair amount. And I remember hearing about the whole Firewise movement. And I heard about that earlier in my career, but it hadn't really taken off here. And I was just going to ask, do you mind sort of sharing your story on, give us a little bit about what Firewise even is, and then talk to us about some of those early meetings. I know you and Mr. Stam I think, kind of spearheaded that here in Amador County. If you don't mind, just expand on that a little bit for us.
Absolutely. So, the Firewise program is a nationally recognized through NFPA program where community members can build programs within their community, 8 homes or more, to be more wildfire resilient. So, you're going to do a jurisdictional map of the community that you want Firewise. You're going to build a 3-year action plan to identify the projects you want to accomplish and have mitigated in those 3 years for your community. An example is roadside clearing, vegetation management, overhead clearing of canopies on your roadways, street signs, address signs, etc. And then we as the fire department are going to come out and do a risk assessment for your community. So we're going to identify what your major target hazards are, if you back up into any canyons or ridgeways or what those look like specifically for that area. And then we are going to submit all of that and you'll get nationally recognized. You'll get a sign. And then the fire department meets with you every year to continue those community member meetings and just to educate each other. So where Amador Fire kind of came into the play with this is a gentleman named Dick Stam started the very first Firewise community in Amador County, upcountry and Pioneer. And he came to our office one day and said, we need to do more of this. There's funding out there, but not very many people are utilizing this program or even know what it is. So I did a ton of research on my own with the help of him. And we just started going to community members' houses, just shy of knocking on doors, I feel like, and meeting with people and really educating them. And that has grown in the last 4 years to now Amador County has 40 registered Firewise communities.
Amazing.
And I think it's so much more than just vegetation management projects. We're building communities to communicate with each other. So if an elderly person down the road, has no vehicle and we're evacuating that community, somebody's assigned to get that person out. There's so many positives about the program, but I really push the community involvement. And as you've seen, the last couple of weeks, we've been doing presentations with the community members, and they're having barbecues and they're hosting potlucks and just mingling with each other, which I think is something that we steered away from for a long time. And now we're seeing that come back.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with you on how important that is. Firewise is far from perfect, but for now it's what we have, and it's a good mechanism for that education piece and that community information piece. What I mean by that is them communicating with each other, neighbors helping neighbors, so on and so forth.
Right.
And I agree with your earlier statement. We don't want people living in fear. We understand the threat of wildfire is very real and it is dangerous. There's no question about it. But there's things we can do to lessen that danger. And I feel it's incumbent on us as the fire department that we educate our communities to do those things to lessen that threat. And Firewise is a great way to do it. And I really appreciate your involvement and frankly, your passion for it.
Yeah, thank you. And one thing I just want to add on to that is I was recently online taking a class that I'm in right now, and it's an emergency management course. And one of the things that they talked about was the overall planning of an incident. So you have the incident, you have, the process of how the incident flows or the cleanup of that process. But where departments and counties often fail is the pre-planning to disasters. And that really surprised me because I feel like that's what we do a ton of. But it's really true. When you showed the statistics, a lot of people are not focusing on how to plan beforehand for fires, flooding, snowstorms, whatever. And that kind of just drove me more to be like, hey, we can do this. And you were in the meeting with me, somebody said the other day that wildfire is the only natural disaster that we can prevent. And that really was like, whoa, that's true too. Yeah. So why wouldn't we be out there educating these people to feel safer, to know they can leave their home in the summertime safely and they don't have to hunker down in their house? And we're the fire department. We owe that to these people.
I agree. And I could not agree with you more on that, Kayla. I think you do an amazing job. I know I speak for the entire district when I say we really appreciate you doing that. Putting our best foot forward, if you will. Something else I wanted to kind of transition into a little bit is talk about your relationship with the media. And I'm going to start by telling a quick story. We had a very large commercial fire, and it's overwhelming, attracted a lot of media attention for during the event and the days following it. And I remember one of the media outlets wanted access to some areas that were, they were dangerous to the everyday citizen, but we were able to accommodate them with a guided tour And I spoke to that news crew and said, "Hey, I have a brand new PIO. It's just starting out. I'll give you this tour, no problem. We'll take care of you and anybody else. But could you please sit down with her and just give her some pointers on, what she can do to build a relationship with the media?" And I'm very proud to say that you took advantage of that. Not only did you represent the district very well, but you sure enough started building relationships with all those outlets. And one of the things I think is so impressive is that how they reach out to you now for news stories and things. And that's a testament again to your commitment and your professionalism. So just talk to me a little bit. How'd you do that?
Yeah, we communicated via text message. I did some research on that reporter to know, their experience and what they were about. And I set up a lunch date with them and I drove to them to make it convenient. I just put myself in a position that was a little vulnerable, maybe a little embarrassing to ask questions, but I just asked the questions. Even if I thought I knew the answer, I asked the questions. What do they want? What is a breaking news story? When do you run a breaking news story? If I'm sending you info, when do you want it? And those are the conversations that we had for almost 2 hours. As you know, being a public information officer, we are dealing with the media consistently. And it was very important that I understood the role of the media, my role dealing with the media, that I'm going to the right person. And so just putting myself in that position was really so rewarding because I learned so much out of that couple hours of just simply asking the questions. Something that really intimidated me when I started in the PIO role was always thinking that the reporter could make you look bad on an incident, wants you to fumble on your words or wants you to misspeak. And that's really not true, though you have to be careful of those things at the same time. If you look bad, you're making their news channel look bad. So they don't want that. So understanding that their questions, you can pause in between questions and just how all of that flows through. I continue to go down to Sacramento and meet with people. I have all of the news anchors' phone numbers for texting back and forth. And when we have an incident, I oftentimes, because we're a more rural area, we're not going to get a crew up here, we'll send them the images that they need. And we get on the news, 9 times out of 10 with those images.
Right, and we'll talk about the importance of that in a minute. But yeah, I appreciate you expanding on that process. I think too, again, credibility and all those things come into play, and we're not sending them, a bunch of just filler, if you will. We try to send them something with some substance. That's important for people to know. Kind of moving down that path, I think it's one thing to be on the news, and it's always fun to see your agency represented that way. But more importantly, I view that as another important piece of informing the community.
Mm-hmm.
What are they getting for their money? What's the return on investment? We're taking their hard-earned tax dollars. What are we doing with that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think all the different ways we can be transparent with emergency response, training, prevention, so on and so forth is critical.
Yeah.
And those outlets help us spread that message. And that's certainly another big part of your role.
Absolutely. And I think it's another thing to add on that as a PIO or for anybody representing the agency is, like you said, to maintain your transparency. And anytime you're giving out information, that it's vetted and accurate, but also using more mainstream language. As you know, the fire service has a ton of acronyms and different verbiage that the normal community member may not necessarily understand. So for me, I have made it a personal challenge, and I'll continue on this path in the last year and a half to understand the operational side more. So I can speak to that, but I can also translate it to the everyday citizen so they understand what we're doing, what our operations are, what are we doing on this incident that puts it in terms that person's going to understand.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And that is a big part of your job for sure. You're that conduit between the everyday citizen and those people in the business. Yeah, so good job. Another thing I wanted to touch on that can be a little sensitive, but I think it's important. We're in a small rural county. There's 4 other fire agencies in this county with us. And it's important that we share our message, but that we do it in a way that's not condescending or, for lack of a better term, casting any shade on our partner agencies. There's a real balance there. What are some things you do or consider in your messaging that helps prevent that. Because certainly the last thing we want to do is, you know, act as if we're better than anybody.
Yeah, I think the first thing is to always make sure that what we're speaking about is something that is ours in terms like our jurisdiction, our incident, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And making sure that if we have resources there that are helping us, like we oftentimes do, we're giving that agency credit where credit's due.
Perfect.
I think that we rely heavily on a lot of other agencies and departments of all different aspects. And if we can help, share their story with our story, and it just shows the community how we're all collaborating and working together. My biggest thing is building those relationships with other agencies or other PIOs of other agencies beforehand. When CHP got their new PIO about 3 years ago, I called her and I met her for coffee. When Sheriff's Office transitioned into their new OES person, I called and met him for coffee, and just kind of inserting myself and putting myself out there to build those relationships so we're not meeting and learning how each other operate at the pickup truck on a live incident. I think that's something that's really important, and to build that credibility with one another.
Yeah, the command post is not the place to build relationships. Right? You should have them in place long before those things are set up.
Absolutely.
That's a good point. I think it's been a tricky path for us. I think we've learned along the way. People, it's not even about really offending people. It's just about staying in our lane.
Right.
I know
Absolutely.
we've made some posts in the past where neighboring agencies that are, a little smaller in size than us in terms of numbers were really taken back that we had made that post. And I think we've kind of learned that, hey, we got to be real sensitive to that. We're not seeing it as us being this big over-imposing agency. We're just trying to share our story to where others may be threatened by that for various reasons. And we certainly do not want to do that. We are not here to threaten anybody. We're just here to tell Amber Fire's story.
Right.
And I think you do a great job at that, Kayla.
Thank you.
So, Kayla, we talked a little bit about your background in the fire service and your family and the challenges that, come with this role as our public information officer. One of the things I wanted to touch on before we wrap this up is your perspective. I think you have somewhat of a unique perspective. I know prior to my arrival, you spent some time working shifts with our line staff on the engines responding to calls. I just was hoping maybe you could share a little bit of that with us.
So I started doing 24-hour shifts on Wednesdays up country at Station 111 in the Pioneer area. And the reason why I did that was because I didn't ever want to speak about something as a public information officer if I haven't seen and done it myself. People can see right through that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a good PIO obviously has to have credibility. Doesn't mean you got to be an expert firefighter by no means, but by having a little bit of that perspective, that firsthand experience, I think is super valuable. I admire you for that. And I admire Chief White for allowing you to do that. That's good. What were some things that maybe surprised you working shift work in a fire station? People have these ideas of what that's going to be like, and then I always sort of crack up when I hear some of the theories out there, and I compare that to the realities of working shift work. But what were some things that surprised you, if you don't mind?
I think one of the main things that surprised me the most was the schedule for the day. Every time I went to the station, and I'd bounce between Pine Grove and Pioneer a couple times with different captains to get different crews and their knowledge, but every day was structured. Every morning, there was expectations. You're not sleeping in, so to say, and as a quote unquote firefighter, the youngest person on the totem pole there, you have expectations to do things. You're taking the trash out, you're starting breakfast, you're putting the coffee pot on. And I really liked that because you knew your role and you knew what you were going to do every single day. And then embedded in that is training. Every day you're training.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point in the sense that you're basically living there for 48 hours at a time, or in your case, for 24 hours at a time. So there's that sort of housekeeping piece of the fire station, then the regiment of the schedule. Obviously, training's a big priority, a lot of maintenance. I've heard it said before that firefighters are really glorified janitors. And of course, that's tongue in cheek, but to some degree, there's some truth in that. We are cleaning a lot, whether it be the facilities, our apparatus, our equipment, always prepping for the next call. there's a lot to it that I think might surprise some people. And
For
I
sure.
know in the future we'll do some more on, we'll take a deeper dive into our crews and our stations, but I'm glad you have that perspective. I'm glad you have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, something that really surprised me when we were talking about, what surprised me most about riding out on the engine was being able to schedule your day or having a plan for your day, I should say, and then that just not happening because of calls. And I think that I've really used that experience in my role as a public information officer because I go into the office now thinking I have a plan and tasks to check off one by one. And if we start getting calls or we have a meeting we need to go to, that doesn't work. And it really shows the importance of staying on track, getting your work done when you have time, and not pushing things off. And I think that that aligns perfectly with the station life too.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think you do a good job of that. You do get pulled in a lot of different directions. You're like we talked about earlier in this episode, your main role is public information officer, but you fulfill a lot of different um, functions within the organization. You're obviously very heavy in our Firewise stuff, our other community risk reduction related things, our community outreach, so on and so forth. And it is important to stay focused. And, you have a plan, but it's flexible. And that
Mhm.
applies to all of us at all levels in the organization. But yeah, very good point.
If somebody was to ask you, what is your role in our community? What do you do? Like, what's your role in the firm specific to the public information officer? I want to reiterate, you do much more than that. And I realize that. But specific to your duties as our PIO, how would you explain that to somebody?
I'll be honest with you. It's always kind of been, it's a hard one to explain to people because the PIO role does so much within the PIO role.
Yeah, right.
But, how I would explain it is my job is to be present and collect information. Let's say we're on an incident and give that out, disperse that properly to the public so they know what's going on. We do so much work in the communities. The last thing that we want to do is fall short or not be unavailable when an incident is going down. We have a great team of battalion chiefs and chief officers that are always sharing information with me. Something that would hurt us is if I don't know of something going on in our department or our county and I'm asked about it. So I think at maintaining relationships within the district, maintaining information, making sure that we're building those relationships within the department, with other agencies and the community, and just making sure that we're there for everybody. Because at the end of the day, that's our job, is to be there.
Yeah, no, that's good. Good way to put it. Well, I find extreme value in it. I've said it before. I think as fire chief, having a PIO that's as active as you are, incredible as you are, I'm just very, very grateful for that. You do a lot to help me out. Everything from organizing our schedules to setting up community meetings. I'm a big believer in connecting with our community, as you put so well earlier in this interview. So I can't thank you enough.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
you sitting down with me today, and I got big shoes to fill trying to interview you, but I appreciate your patience.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you, Caleb.
And that wraps up episode 5 of the Amador Fire Can Report. A huge thank you to Chief Withrow for sitting down with me to discuss the PIO role here with Amador Fire. Remember, we're more than just a department. We're your neighbors, your first responders, and your community partners. Stay connected with us on social media for updates, safety tips, and more behind-the-scenes stories. Until next time, stay safe and stay prepared.